It's good to see all of you. For those of you who saw John Costello's presentation earlier, Holly Ladd was a member of my board, an extraordinary woman. Nancy Butler is one of the people that we work with. She's actually actively dying as we are here, but in a very beautiful way. We are here for the people that we tend to. And for me, it's always been important to remember. And yet my challenge sometimes is to remember to remember. And I see all of you here in all of these seats, and I can actually see all of those that we at CCALS, and I would think all of those that you've taken care of, they could all be here. The extraordinary amount of people that we have tended to and cared for. For me, it's always important to remember to honor them, because that's why we are here. You know, this is my first time, and the Alliance, I'm incredibly grateful. It has awakened me from the sense that this is indeed global. I'm from Massachusetts, and it's much more than just the United States and all that we carry there. So I'm so incredibly grateful to be here and to be with all of you. And there's a part of me, because I had to ask someone earlier, who's in attendance, who's our audience here? And a lot of clinicians, which are the people that I work with. And, you know, for me, I wish sometimes all of our scientists could gather, you know, all the researchers to hear what we have to say, you know, to learn more, even more than they already know. I mean, their focus is on treatments and cure. My focus, your focus, is on the people. And for me, not patients, but people. And at Compassionate Care ALS, we do our very best to tend to, and care for those individuals living with and dying with and of complications from ALS. So I want to honor a man named Gordon Heald, who I tended to back in 1997, because without that experience I would not be here, and it changed my life, along with meeting many of the families that we've worked with over the years. It's all about relationships. It's remembering, for me, my mentors, my teachers, my colleagues, my friends, all those who impacted my work, just as you have mentors, teachers, colleagues, and friends who have impacted your work in order to allow us to do what we do, which is showing up. The art is showing up for people living with ALS and their families and their communities. You know, so how do we do that day in and day out? How do we carry that? How do we bear witness to the extreme suffering of others? You know, in our work at Compassionate Care ALS, I would like to think compassion finds its way into every aspect of what we do as an organization. Whether it's Adam delivering a portable ramp to someone, or other items and equipment, to knocking on the door and seeing someone briefly, and sitting with people along the way. I'll share with you how we do some of the things that we do. Take what serves you, and if it doesn't, what's next? You know, that's what I share with our families. What works, right? How do we sit with and care for? As I said, our work has always been and will always be about tending to those individuals and showing up in hopefully an extraordinary way. Everything we do is an invitation. One of my least favorite words is advice. I don't give advice. I work with counsel, which is a way of sharing, which is a way of being. You know, for me, advice is me telling you what I think you should be doing, which doesn't mean it's wrong. Our doctors give advice. But for me, in my ways, to be in counsel with people, which means to show up, which means to be present, which means to listen. When we're able to do that, I think compassion in its own form just easily unfolds for us. Many of you who are clinicians, you're in the institutions and hospital settings, etc. So there are indeed rules and regulations. I'm not sure I could do my work in that setting, but I'm incredibly grateful for all that you do. I give thanks to Dr. Merit Chakovitz at Mass General, who I've known since 1997. She was Gordon's neurologist. We have an extraordinary relationship there. And I've learned so much, and my hope is that we can bring to the institutions in the model that we've created, which is a relational model. It's about people. It's relationships. So we've been able to actually, you know, there's friendships, there's time to get to know people. Sometimes not nearly enough time. My friend Sanjay, and maybe I'll have time to share more when I speak of not enough time. This is a vest that Sanjay's mother sent me in the mail about a month after she died. Maybe I'll share more if I have the time. As we know, quality of care goes hand in hand with quality of life. The better the quality of care, the better the quality of life. And the better we can tend to ourselves, the better we can do our own inquiry, then I really believe the more we can show up for our people. When I go to a home, as maybe some of you do, and my days are literally spent on the road visiting families, sometimes 7 days a week. My car has 385,000 miles on it. We visit families all over Massachusetts, New England, sometimes around the country, and we get phone calls from people around the world. We do our best to show up as best we can. And we are human, so sometimes we drop the ball. But the relational model, it really came to fruition when I met my friend Jim Lester, who's been gone for some years now, but I walked into Jim's home, and when we walk into someone's door, I have no idea what I'm walking into. Sure, there's intake, but what's the story? What's the story? I walked into Jim's home, and there was these extraordinary photos on the wall, and Jim, I thought I had met God. Incredibly tall man, a beautiful white beard. And he was sitting down, and I'm looking at these photos on the wall, and he asked me to go and sit down. I said, not to you, tell me what's going on with these photos, because I was stunned. Anyway, long story short, Jim was on the first American expedition to Mount Everest in 1963. And these photos were of the Sherpa. In this expedition, there were 700 Sherpa. They didn't fly in. They literally carted everything in. They carried things in. So in many ways, as clinicians, as all of us who tend to, in many ways we are Sherpa. We carry the water. We bring counsel. We walk with the families that we tend to. When we can walk with in that way, that in its way is compassion. The art of language and how we speak sets everything up about, I think, the relationship. You know, too often our folks are in the clinical settings, and again, there's not enough time. And if we can do things in a conscious way with awareness and speak a language that people can hear and understand, it makes an incredible, incredible difference. There's opportunity and potentiality for, honestly, the sacred and the profane to emerge when we can sit with, be with, and sometimes be still and be quiet. Be in the unknown. I don't have all the answers. I've learned as best I can to be okay in the not knowing. Can we do that? I've learned when I walk into someone's home, I leave my baggage at the door. I do my very best to walk into someone's home very clean and very clear, with no expectations on any particular outcome. I walk in, how can I serve? And you all know well, there's some families in extreme difficulties. There's extreme dysfunction in the world. And yet, we still show up. It's the art of showing up. There's nothing more important. And that which I speak to is all, here's the art of showing up, and what do I have to do to show up well? And when I leave my baggage at the door, that's one really, really good way of not projecting what I think people should be doing. One of the first things I tell people when I sit with them, I'm not here to tell you everything you don't want to know. I'm not here to tell you everything you don't want to know. And oftentimes they're looking at me, well, Ron, I want to know everything. But everybody doesn't want to know everything. Some people want to know absolutely nothing. How are we able to guide them in that space? You know, I mean, still, unfortunately, even today, I meet people and, you know, they're getting information that they're so not ready to hear. So how can we walk with them in a gentle, loving, caring way and know when they're ready or know when they're not? My friend John Ember, who you saw in John Costello's presentation, John is considered, was considered, still is considered, he's been gone for several years now, to be the finest contemporary painter in America, an extraordinary human being. And when we met, it was an immediate connection. And I told him that. I said, look, I'm not here to tell you everything you don't want to know. And he looked at me and said, Ron, I want to know everything. And of course, his first circumstance, can I stay in my living space? 3-floor co-op. So we figured all of that out. Then he wanted to know, what will this illness look like? Where is this going to take me? And his wife Jill was sitting there, and she said, yeah. So along the way, we shared. It wasn't all in that meeting. We became very dear friends. And over time, you know, I would see John, or he would call me. And he would ask me, Ron, I need a little more color. Because along the way, what I learned from him is to do a painting for people. Because oftentimes when people want to know, there was a lovely little metaphor. You asked me to paint you a picture. And they would say yes. And so I always remember John from that. Choices and possibilities. When it comes to choices and possibilities, it's imperative that we find the right language to share with our people. And those choices, and there are many, whether it's a feeding tube, a tracheotomy, et cetera, how do I live my life differently? That's one of the biggest questions. How do we live our life differently? And are we comfortable enough sharing that with them? I'm going to read you a quote. And this comes from Being with Dying, Cultivating Compassion and Fearlessness in the Presence of Death, which is the booklet for the Compassionate End-of-Life Training Guide from Joan Halifax, Upaya Zen Center in Santa Fe. I highly recommend it. Compassion. The ability to be present for all levels of suffering, feeling the suffering of others, aspiring to transform it, and engaging in the process of helping those who suffer. Compassionate care acknowledges the truth of impermanence, the absence of a separate self-identity, and the possibility of freedom from suffering. there are many choices and possibilities. The word possibilities, the word potentialities, because it all indeed does look the same. There's many of my people who don't know, because I don't see it not in the printed word a lot, that everyone doesn't lose their voice, right? And everyone doesn't lose the use of their hands. Though yes, many do, most do, but it's really important to share what hope is, what faith is. You are doing extraordinarily sacred work. And I know that's a big word, but it's important, incredibly important. One other piece I wish to share with you. The white elephant in the room is always the reality of one's death. So my question to you, which I offered to many along the way and I've explored, are we willing to become more familiar with the reality of our own mortality, our own dying? Are we willing to become familiar with that? And respectfully, if we're not, then how can we tend to the people that we're tending to as best as we can? Because that's what they're facing. Death is right here. How do we do that lovingly and with incredible respect? We all have been born, and our one commonality behind that is we all will die. So why not dance with that a little bit? The people you saw in John Costello's presentation, Holly and John and Nancy, wonderful and beautiful examples of dancing their dying. Thank you guys for having me here, and thank you for all that you do. Yeah.
Okay, we do have 2-3 minutes for questions, so please raise your hand and wait until the mic comes to you, and stand up and say who you are and where you're from. So any questions in the room? Can't see any hands moving. It looks like we've got one at the back. Okay, yeah, down at the side here.
Can you hear me? Oh, hi, I'm Tina. Thank you for that. I just wondered, I know things are different in the States to how they are here, but how do you hear about people living with MND?
How do we hear about people? We are flooded with people. For years, it was word of mouth, but we have an extraordinary relationships with Mass General Hospital, UMass Medical, the relationships that have been cultivated at MGH. Many, many, many families are sent to us. John Costello refers people to us. Our work is unique. We tend to individuals physically, emotionally, spiritually. It's a unique model. It's incredibly relational. And so that's how they hear about us, and oftentimes word of mouth. We bring a great deal to the table, not nearly enough time to share all that, but I invite you to go to our website. Yeah.
Anyone else?
Well, I'll take up my time. We are actually building an education and retreat center, a sanctuary. We've raised $3.5 million. It's a place where individuals and their families living with MND, ALS can come and stay, right? A sanctuary, a place to get away. It's a place for caregivers to come. It's a place for our healthcare professionals to come. I've been doing this work since 1997. And yes.
Okay.
Just one more question. Thank you so much. Could you repeat the book that you mentioned earlier from the woman in San Francisco, was it? Or something you referred to? You quoted something and you said, I recommend her.
Joan Halifax.
Okay.
Upaya Zen Center.
Thank you.
Extraordinary end-of-life work. Extraordinary. Yeah. I invite you to go to our website. Look at our resources. There's some incredible people doing incredible work in the world, just like you're doing incredible work in the world. So.
Okay, thank you, Ron.
Yeah.
Please join me in thanking Ron.